process, and circularity. The following text examines the role of circularity in philosophy and biology. For Whitehead, circularity is not a foundational principle but a byproduct of relational processes, in which self-reference is already implicitly present. In contrast, for Maturana and Varela, circularity is constitutive of living systems. Autopoietic processes produce and maintain themselves. Formalizations encounter limits because they require stability, whereas liveliness is dynamic, relational, and continuous. Many philosophical problems arise from transferring the logic of language onto processes. The methodological implication is that philosophy must begin with processes, not outcomes, to understand the conditions of emergence. And here we go. Circularity. Does this concept play a role in Alfred North Whitehead's philosophy? At first glance, it quickly becomes apparent that Whitehead's thought does not require circularity as a foundational principle. In Process and Reality, he describes reality as a series of processual, relationally interconnected events, within which self-reference is implicitly embedded. Circularity emerges as a consequence of these relational processes, rather than as an explicitly prescribed structure. In other words, Whitehead incorporates self-reference without elevating it to a formal theoretical principle. Comparison with Maturana and Varela. For Umberto Maturana and Francisco Varela, by contrast, circularity is constitutive. In their theory of autopoiesis, a living system is, by definition, operationally closed. It produces and sustains itself through a network of mutually generating processes. Formally, these structures are represented as networks, dynamic systems, or fixed-point models. Here, it becomes evident that circularity is a necessary condition for life, whereas Whitehead regards it as a byproduct of relational processes. However, tension arises when one attempts to capture this circularity formally. Processes such as autopoiesis are dynamic, relational, and continuous, whereas formal representations demand stability, repeatability, or discrete boundaries. This creates the impression that formalization may be a fundamentally inadequate endeavor, unable to fully account for the inherently processual character of living systems. Formal representation and the problem of liveliness. Formal models, graphs, dynamic systems, or category-theoretic constructions, can represent operationally closed systems. Yet the phenomenon of life emerges only when materiality, continuous production, and boundary formation are taken into account. Formalism alone captures structure, but not liveliness. Here the contrast between process ontology, Whitehead, and biological theory, Maturana and Varela, becomes particularly striking. For Whitehead, liveliness and self-reference are already embedded within relational processes. Critique of the overemphasis on circularity. The frequent emphasis on circularity in systems theory or biology can give the impression that it is a principle to be defended. Similar to logical paradoxes, however, the focus is less on resolving supposed problems than on understanding the conditions under which they arise. Formalization can thus appear as an attempt to stabilize or rescue something that is inherently processual, rather than as a means to grasp the conditions of its emergence. Language, metaphors, and the source of philosophical problems. Many so-called philosophical problems arise from transferring the logic of language. Concepts and metaphors that are treated as things in language actually point to processes. If these processes are not carefully distinguished from linguistic thing metaphors, it can create the illusion that they are formalizable. Problems such as consciousness, subjectivity, or liveliness then appear mysterious or seem to require magical ingredients, mind, soul, when in fact the essential insight lies in their dynamic emergence. Methodological implication. The central insight is this: philosophy must begin with processes, not with their outcomes. Only through the analysis of the conditions of emergence can understanding be achieved. Philosophy involves questioning one's own assumptions and being willing to challenge one's worldview, concepts, and ultimately oneself, rather than becoming lost in the technical implementation of an abstract conceptual edifice. Thank you for listening.